I've been in the cattle industry for 40 years. And back in the bad old days, cattle handling was really terrible. From an animal welfare standpoint, cattle handling is actually one of the bright spots. That has greatly improved. There was a big survey done by Kansas State University through a whole bunch of feed yards in Nebraska, where they used my objective scoring system, and I'm going to be showing that later, where they measured cattle handling. And electric prod use was down very, very low, under 5%. That's really good. Now the frustrating thing is the handling's gotten a whole lot better, but nobody knows anything about it. This really frustrates me. There's been a lot of improvements in the industry, and the public doesn't know about it. They think everything that's on activist websites is absolutely right. That's just not true. And this is one of the reasons why I put up the video, beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin, that shows how large beef slaughter plant works. We need to be showing what we do. There's a lot of kids that think eggs grow on trees. There was a study done in England, in the UK, and they studied young people around 18 years to the mid-20s, and only 50% could connect pigs with bacon. They just had absolutely no idea about anything. We're getting a public today that's more and more and more separated from the practical world. And when I went out to Hollywood, and I talked to all the Hollywood press, they were not interested in movie questions. All they wanted to do was ask cattle questions. And they asked questions like, what is a feed yard? What is a calf farm? How does slaughter plants work? They weren't attacking, they were just curious. And the thing that you gotta realize is that the people that you want to communicate with, it's the public. And surveys show that when you actually poll the public on an issue in animals, that their responses on a lot of issues are right in the middle, in between activist groups and agriculture groups. Public is who we've got to be talking to. How many people in here have got Facebook friends in New York, Chicago, LA, someplace like that? Well, what we need to be doing is showing just regular things like feeding cattle. How does the mill work? You actually have a cattle hospital for your cattle where you give them individual care. You need to just be showing them that stuff, because what's chores to you is interesting to the public. I go back and forth between the livestock world and the public world. I have a sister that lives in New York, and they believe all the bad press. But then we got to make sure that we're doing things right. And I want to talk some about just some basic cattle handling. And then, at the end of my talk, we're going to discuss whether there are some welfare problems. But I always save the bad stuff for last, because I like to talk about the good stuff first. Now I've got to... Okay, calm animals are easier to handle. I think you all know that. It takes half an hour for them to calm back down, so the trick is, don't get them all excited. Now there's been some new research that will enable you to tell when an animal is starting to really get stressed when you handle it. When an animal gets upset and gets fearful, the whites of its eyes will show. This is true for both cattle and horses. That's your first sign that they're getting stressed. Now, if you can handle cattle and you squeeze shoot, keep them with a nice soft brown eye, you're doing a good job. I've actually checked this out at the meat plants. And when the plants are very, very, very good, we're getting about 40% with a soft brown eye. That's really good. Now, there's other signs of stress they will do before they do when they're even more stressed. Tail swishing, pooping, heads up looking all around. And if you get them really hurt them, like zapping them with electric prods and things like that, then they'll vocalize and move. But the first sign the animal's starting to get a little bit upset is that white eye showing. And this is actually documented scientifically. This is new research that's been done in the last 5 years. And you might be wondering, well, how did scientists figure out that when the eye white shows on a cow or on a steer, he's getting upset and fearful? Because if you give him Valium, then it doesn't happen, but that'd be totally illegal. You can't do that. That was only done to show that it was fear. When the animal gets upset when you handle it, it's fear. Now, some people may say to me, that's being anthropomorphic to call it fear. No, it's neuroscience. And it's neuroscience has been over in the neuroscience literature for as long as I've been around. It's just gradually now getting over into the veterinary literature. It's about time it did. Now there's the proverbial chain hanging down in the chute. Why, after 40 years, do I still have to keep talking about this chain? Because people don't take it out. You know, the distractions, the little details that make cattle balk. I did a cattle handling workshop at a feed yard in Nebraska last summer, and they had some vehicles parked right where the cattle could see them. And until we got those vehicles moved, they weren't going to go up the chute. Well, I now found out that one of the reasons why I see the chain is I'm an extreme visual thinker. Well, in my cattle handling book, I do have a few copies out there in the bookstore, which will be closing right after my talk, because Brad's got to catch a plane and get out of here before the snow comes. And I have a checklist. I have a verbal checklist now of all the distractions. I've been beginning to learn how to communicate more verbally. Okay, anytime any place is a little change in flooring, going from dirt to concrete, it can make them stop. Here we're headed right straight into the sun. Head into the sun, blinds them. Sort of like you know, going down the freeway and the sun is blinding you. Reflections on the floor. And when you have reflections on the floor, you can get time of day effects. Where maybe in the morning, everything is fine, but in the late afternoon, it's not. Well, you need to get down the chute and see what they're seeing. I know when it's a sunny day, you're going to get shadows. On a cloudy day, you don't get shadows. You know, now there's a controversy as to whether or not you should have solid sides on your chutes. Well, if there's no people around in the middle of nowhere, then you keep all the people and dogs away from it, except when you go in to move the cattle, and maybe you leave the sides open. But in most feed yards, you've got a lot of commotion going around, and the most important part you need to get solid is the outer perimeters. As they see feed truck going by, that's going to make them balk. You know, if there's a lot of commotion around, then you need to be covering it up. Now notice how that animal there is avoiding walking on the sunbeam. I want to make you good observers. I want you to be observant. This is what I call the black hole. You got your cattle handling facility inside, it's real sunny outside. I don't care how it's designed. The cattle will not go into the black hole on a sunny day. In the nighttime, light it up with some lights, and they'll be attracted towards the light. Animals tend to go towards the light, but they will not go into blinding light, like going down the sunny freeway. So you might say, well, let's put some lights in there to light it up. Well, the problem is the sun is very, very bright. And it's going to be very hard to light it up. So one of the things you could do is build a shade out over this to shade the entrance going in. That's going to help you. That's one way to fix it. Another way to fix it is to rip off some of the steel and put in white translucent panels. So when the animals look in there, they can see daylight through the building. And I like the translucent panels because they get rid of all the shadows. You know, windows make shadows. You don't want that. Now you'll notice right here you got a solid crowd gate. That's one thing that should be solid. You don't want to have that shoved back into your face. Okay, the big question I always get asked when we take people to the slaughter plant is, do the cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? I get asked that question all the time. Now I found that cattle behave the same way at the slaughter plant as they behave at the feed yard. And this computer just made a sound. I hope everything's okay with the webinar. One thing good here is inside that tunnel, you've got white translucent panels. So I show this slide to my students and I ask them to look for distractions. And they all notice the chain hanging down. But about half the people fail to notice the 3 people standing right where they should not be standing. They should not be standing there. You're asking the cattle to come up to visible people. This shows one of my curved layouts. Cattle have a natural tendency to want to go back to where they come from. That's one of the reasons the curved chute works. Another reason it works is because when the cattle is standing at the entrance of the chute, they don't see all the people standing around the squeeze chute. Okay, this just shows an aerial view, one of my layouts. And if you're going to use a tub, you want to lay it out in a full half circle. So there's a cattle come on around the bend, they're going back to where they come from. You want to use that tendency to go back to where they come from. And if you're going to use a tub, it better be laid out right. Because if you bend the chute too sharply, right where it joins the single file chute, the cattle are going to balk and they're not going to go up the race. You've got to lay things out right. And the most critical part of it is right where your single file joins your crowd pen. The other thing is, fill your crowd pen half full. Good handling requires more walking to bring up smaller groups of cattle. People need to understand the flight zone. I think this is something that most people in this room understand this. We've always got new people coming in all the time, and you need to explain these things. And if you have an animal that's rearing up in a chute, he's doing it because people are standing in the flight zone. They need to back up, get away from them. Now here's the handy-dandy little way to get them in the squeeze chute without the electric throttle. And it's very counterintuitive. You take a step forward and then walk quickly back by him. You walk back by him in the opposite direction of desired movement inside the flight zone. You quickly just walk back by him, and once you cross the shoulder, then your animals are going to move forward. And when you're up close to them in the chute, the point of balance is at the shoulder. You get further away from them, sometimes the point of balance will move up just to behind the eye. But you're not going to stand in front of the eye and make them go forward. Okay, right there I'm just demonstrating turning an animal. People get way too wild and crazy with driving aids. We've got to get rid of all the yelling and screaming. I think most people now in Nebraska now know that yelling and screaming is bad and really stressful. You know, the handling's the bright spot. There's still some bad areas. My student went out and visited some feed yards, and things were really good. Went to a bunch of Colorado yards, but she caught one person ripping out ear tags and not cutting the ear tags and ripping the ear. That is not okay. That is bad. That was 2012. No, you don't do that. You know, every place else she went was really super good, but then we had that one really bad thing. Well, that's not the sort of thing you want playing on an activist website. You know, you take a little tool and you cut the ear tags. You don't rip them out. And the person that was doing this, it was a contract crew that was paid on how fast they can ram a cattle through the squeeze chute, and they were in a hurry. No, we can't do stuff like that. We have to look at everything that we do and say, how is this going to play all over the internet everywhere? See, one of the things that's the problem with the internet is, out here, it's impossible to watch videos. I tried to watch weather videos last night, and it jammed up 5 times on a 3-minute video. But when you get in the big cities, they work just great. Now, one of the things got to be done about rural internet access. It's just atrocious. Okay, fill your crowd pen half full. Another principle is use your following behavior. Wait until you have some space in your single file, and then bring them in and just keep on going. If you fill your crowd pen when your chute's full, all the cattle turn around on you. What you want to do is time your bunches. Use following. You bring them in, keep them going through the crowd pen. This applies to any kind of design of any system. Let's rename the crowd pen the passing through pen. And notice I don't have the gate jammed up tight on them. And the animals should walk into that single file easily. If they stop at the single file entrance, maybe you've got a backstop gate there that's shaking. Maybe you need to put a remote control rope on your backstop so you can hold it open. Don't make all your cattle go clumping through the backstop. Watch your ear radar. When animals are calm, they'll put an ear on each other. I was looking at the picture of the Angus bull and the black Angus calves that was being shown. All the calves were facing the rancher with their ears forward when the rancher was petting the bull on the rear end, and his ears were back, but his ears were back watching the rancher. And you say, look how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other, and the other ear is on me taking the picture. Watch your animal's ears. Now, if they're absolutely frightened and scared, then the ears are just going to be flat back. But when they're just sort of watching, where's the animal putting its ears? You know, let's look at the details. Behavioral principles of restraining them. I can't emphasize enough the importance of non-slip flooring and cattle handling facilities. The Double D Family Mat Company, it's got lots of nice woven tires. But there are some problems. I had some of my people looking at some cattle handling 2 years ago in Nebraska at a place I will not name because it'll be a gigantic embarrassment. And the amount of cattle falling down coming out of their squeeze chute is just atrocious. You know, what seems to be happening on the handling is the people that have become good has really expanded. It's tripled since I've gone in the industry. But there's still a bottom 10%. doing bad stuff. They were doing it in the 70s, and they're doing it now, too. And then you gotta make sure on your hydraulic squeeze chutes you don't get the pressure control screwed down too tight. Like when you squeeze it up, it better stop before their eyeballs are popping out. You know, it's just that simple. If they move when you squeeze it up, you're hurting them. If they move when you put the head gate on them, you're hurting them. You're saying, ouch. And if you're doing things really right, you should have no more than 5% of your cattle moo right when you catch them, right when you're trying to get them in the squeeze chute. You know, you put hot shots all over them, they're going to be mooing. You should be able to get them in that squeeze chute, catch them with no mooing. Now, obviously, if you brand them, they're going to moo. But this is to get them in and caught without the catching and the handling causing mooing. Now, this is some of the work we did on temperament a long time ago. And then cattle that get all excited in the squeeze chute have lower weight gains. Cattle that run out fast have lower weight gains. And we've just done some new research. My student, Michaela Vetters, she's now at the Kansas State Veterinary College. And we validated using walk, trot, canter, and gallop scoring for exit scoring. So you don't have to buy electronic thingies to put in front of the squeeze chute for cattle to break. The animals that just race out, and you can use the horse gaits, tend to have lower weight gain. But on the other hand, don't go overboard on selecting for temperament, because you don't want to select a bunch of dull-head Holsteins for beef cattle. That probably wouldn't be a very good thing. And another one of my students, Connie Flurka, has found that mama cows that have a high hair whorl up here are more vigilant when they're being circled by a strange vehicle. We use that as a threat. And we need to have a cow that's going to, you know, protect her calf. Okay, when you force cattle to do something, they get really stressed. A basic principle in handling is when animals cooperate with you and you're not forcing them, then you greatly lower the amount of fear stress. You lower the amount of cortisol. First experiences with new people, new places, and new vehicles need to be good. Okay, you bring some cattle into the feed yard, let's get some feed out there. If you have a ranch, let's take your young heifers, walk them through the corrals, feed them in the corrals. Because at the first experience in that squeeze chute, it's really painful. Boy, they're never going to want to go in there again. Now, somebody's got to do stuff that's painful. But don't make it your first experience. And there's getting to be more and more research showing that we need to be acclimating animals to handling procedures. And that's especially important for your cows out on the range. So let's spend time walking with cattle, getting them tamed down. Now, something that's new is both scary and attractive. It's attractive when they voluntarily approach. It's scary if you just shove it in their face. So let's say you're using a four-wheeler. Well, let's introduce it gradually. Don't go chasing them with a four-wheeler as their first introduction, because then they're going to be afraid of four-wheelers. Something sudden, that's what tends to scare. And this is a problem I've been saying, is cattle are very specific in how they think. A man on a horse and a man on the ground, that's two different things in the mind of the cattle. And some of the worst cattle and most dangerous cattle to handle at a packing plant are cattle that see their first man on foot at a packing plant. In other words, before they get to the packing plant, they've never had a man on foot or a lady on foot take them in and out of pens. So when you have an animal that might have a 5-foot flight zone to a horse, now has a 50-foot flight zone and 20-foot pen at a packing plant, and that is super dangerous. And they're running back and forth and bouncing off the walls. You know, it's important to get them used to a man on horse, a lady on the ground, a four-wheeler, different vehicles, so that when they go down the supply chain, we're going to have them to handle. Because I've probably done 60% of all my work's been at the meat packing plant, and what I'm seeing now, the packing plants are really getting good. You got McDonald's and everybody else auditing them. The USDA's gotten a whole lot more strict. So the problems I'm seeing now are problems with the animal coming in. An animal I have difficulty handling. Super wild, bouncing off the walls. They gotta have some on-foot experience before I get them at the packing plant. And there's been a couple of hideous accidents. There was one accident that happened about 5 years ago where a parking lot security camera Saw black Angus dots go like this into a pen and then rebound out like this. It did not show that there was a 50-year-old woman knocked over, stepped on her head, permanent brain damage. But the way those black Angus dots moved, it's just that's what high flight zone cattle have never seen a man on foot do. And I've been in an alley with those cattle, and they're racing back and forth, and it's just scarier than heck. So I did an experiment with these cattle that were racing back and forth. We put them in a great big pen, and we had a man on horse go in there, 5-foot flight zone. Then I had a man leading the horse, and they might have a 20-foot flight zone. Then we had the man on foot walk in there, and the whole pen just took off. Well, in a confined area like an auction or a meat plant, that's a real dangerous deal. And let's look at some other handling problems I have seen showing up at the plant. And these are bad welfare issues that I've seen happen with feedlot beef. Right shortly after ractopamine came on the market, and people didn't know how to mix feed, and some of these animals probably got like 5 times the dose. I went to plant in Texas. It was real hot. It's about 95 degrees. And there's like 4 or 5 of these tiger stripe Brahmas, you know, the real heat tolerant cattle, tongues out this far, wouldn't get up. They were sitting like a dog. They wouldn't get up. And then about 20% of the cattle from this one feed yard were mincing around the pen, acting like the floor was hot, like their feet were sore, walking on their tippy toes, and the rest of the herd was just fine. And I go, I've been 35 years in cattle. What am I seeing here? And then I checked these cattle's feet, and on the line, everything was fine. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with them. So then I started getting on the phone. And it probably has something to do with the vasoconstriction effect of beta agonists. Because, you know, emergency room doctors use this when you're bleeding to death. They give you beta agonists to make all your extremities blood supply constrict so you don't die from loss of blood. And then I went to another place, and there was a herd of Holsteins. It was about 100 degrees hot. These were Holstein steers, and again, we had this uneven thing. About 30% or so lame, sore-footed lame, a few animals, open mouth breathing with extended tongues, and another big feed mixing mess. Then I came to Nebraska, and they had a special group of cattle for me in Nebraska. I went to plant in Nebraska. It was probably maybe 60 degrees. They were Zilmax cattle, lots of bull character, taking the steers, turning back into bulls, and I couldn't find anything wrong with those cattle. From a welfare standpoint, they were just fine. And the plant was going, oh, they look really weird. And I said, they look like bulls. I guess you don't know what bulls look like at this packing plant. But there was no welfare issue. They were fine. And they came from one of the big feed yards where they would have had decent feed mixing. And then I've seen some stiff black cattle that were during hot weather. And then I saw something really weird. I went to another plant, and I saw some cattle that was not really hot. And they came out of what I call odds and ends, kind of junky cattle, where you got odds and ends, different kinds of cattle. You had a Simmental, you had a Hereford, you had some Mexican crosses in there, just a bunch of different kinds of cattle. And they'd been given Zilmax, and boy, the Simmental, he got really big, and he was stiff. Didn't want to walk. He was stiff. And the little Mexicans, they were fine. And then I talked to a guy that had petted the statue steer. This is really bad. This steer gets off the truck, gets in a pen, and then he refused to move. And he was standing. They couldn't get it to move. So the USDA had him shoot it, and they tanked it. And there's been some downers showing up in some of the feed yards. You know, all I can say, you want to use beta agonists, you better mix your feed, and you better mix it good, and you better make sure the doses are right. Because open mouth breathing in cattle is not acceptable. The research is very clear. When their mouth is open, heat stress, they are super heat stressed. And they better not be lame. You know, just as we fixed the hammer, now I'm seeing some of these other problems. You want to use that technology, you better make sure this stuff doesn't happen. And what may be happening, you may have a situation where in the feed yard they may look pretty good, but after being on the truck, you know, for however long they're on the truck, and they're getting at the plant, and we're getting these, say, handling problems. And don't just tell me it's anecdotal, it's happened too many times. And last summer, I talked to a guy in Nebraska, it was in eastern Nebraska, and he was top dressing Zilmax. Well, how many cattle there are getting 5 times a dose? You know, we can't do this kind of dumb stuff. Just cannot do it. And one of my biggest concerns is the whole heat stress issue. Really concerned about that. 20 years ago in Australia, they had a heat stress death loss, a big death loss. In Australia, you know, the hemispheres are reversed, so the north is hot and the south is cold. Well, they brought some unacclimatized cattle in from the cold area up north where it's really super hot, and the water supply in the feed yard was real bad, and the cattle sucked the water troughs dry, and they had like 5,000 head of dead cattle. And they had a news helicopter flying overhead to film dead cattle being scooped up in loaders and hauled off in dump trucks. And now every feed yard in Australia has shade. I am concerned. There's been some die-offs, not so much here, but further east. We gotta not let that stuff happen. And one of the downsides of black Angus cattle is they get hot. And when I went down to Uruguay last year, you know what they told me? Black Angus cattle, we won't even buy black Angus cattle. We want red Angus cattle. Because they don't get as hot. You know, I believe in measuring outcomes. We need to be looking at outcomes. They better not be lame. I don't care what you feed them, but they better not be lame. They better not be stiff. They better not be hot or down or some other kind of problem with them. And then the thing with the wildness, that has to do with the not having the on-foot training. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to measure things. We can measure handling. We can measure animal welfare. I believe in outcome measures. The trend, the way things are going now in animal welfare auditing, is to measure animal-based outcome measures. I'm not going to tell you what kind of cattle handling facility you have to have, but you need to have certain outcomes. Like, for example, you can't have cattle just falling down all over the place coming out of your squeeze chute. You have more than 1 or 2%, you've got big problems. We can measure how much you use the hot shot. We can measure how much mooing you get when you catch them. We can measure how fast they come out. These are things that we can measure. We can also measure lameness, open mouth breathing. Things like that are measurable. Now, one of the things that measuring does is it prevents bad from becoming normal. I was at a meeting 6 months ago and I had someone trying to tell me that open mouth breathing in cattle is okay. No, it is not okay. And they are severely heat stressed if they are open mouth breathing at rest. Obviously, if you ran some cattle through a feed yard, you could get some open mouth breathing. You can't have open mouth breathing. We allow that to happen, that's bad becoming normal. I saw a lot of that happen in the pig industry. In the late 80s, we got the lean line pigs. Really bad foot and leg conformation to go along with it. And we got to the point where due to leg conformation problems, we had 50% of our market hogs that were lean. That is not okay. People got used to looking at that. That's bad becoming normal. How do we get pug dogs now that can't breathe even after they've had surgery for breathing? They still can't breathe. You want to see what a normal bulldog looks like? Type in Bulldog's Dilemma 1938. You'll get this New York Times picture. It actually has a snout. Well, we did that with dogs. That's bad becoming normal. Now, I've been involved with a lot of different places writing guidelines. Right now, there's a lot of controversy right now about the ISO animal welfare guidelines. I was on the OIE slaughter committee. And we can't have these vague words. People write stuff like, handle them properly. I don't know what that means. Give those animals sufficient space. I don't know what that means. What it means to you is going to mean something very different to you. And I'm in a battle with vagueness. And I managed to get some wording into the OIE guideline on certain bad things we just don't do. Like, because this is for all over the world, developing countries, like you can't be poking the eyes out of cattle. Nobody here would do that. But since this is being written for the entire world, we have to say, no, you cannot cut tendons or poke out their eyes. Because unfortunately, in some developing countries, those kind of things are done. It's a routine practice. Now, here's an example of something that's clearly worded. All these pigs have to have enough space to lie down without being on top of each other. You know, when I first started working on the McDonald's program, only 30% of the plants could stun 95% of the cattle with a single shot. You know why they were so terrible in the beginning back in 1999? Broken equipment. Just busted. Well, now they fix their equipment. They're way, way better now. Let's score animal handling. How many animals run out of your squeeze chute? Now I realize that there's genetic differences, but I want 75, 80% of your cattle walking or trotting out of squeeze chutes. How many animals fall? If you want to pass the McDonald's audit down here at the Lexington plant or the Grand Island plant, if more than 1% of those cattle fall anywhere in that whole facility, unloading the trucks, going up the chutes, in the yards, they're going to fail the McDonald's audit. It's that simple. And you're only allowed 3 animals out of 100 vocalizing in the stunning chute area. And electric prod use, you need to get that down to 5%. And you need to get electric prodders out of your hands. I think most people are doing that now. The only time you should ever pick it up is if you have a stubborn one that absolutely won't go in the squeeze chute. Then you pick it up, use it, and put it away. And you can go over to the Greeley plant, and they got one battery-operated hotshot, and it's leaning against the wall most of the time. And we ripped out all these overhead wired-in electric prodders. We tore those all out. Tore them out, threw them in the dump. They got one battery-operated prod. Things have come a long way. Okay, this is the critical control points for the American Meat Institute system for scoring meatpacking plants. It's very, very simple. These are all outcome-based measures. How many animals did I shoot on the first shot? There'll be 95% to pass, and they better all be dead before you hang them up. And some people have criticized that and saying, well, that means 5% of the cattle are allowed to suffer. But the problem is if I don't give the plants a few extra shots, then they try to be perfect and then they hang live cattle in the ring. You know, this is something that people that are not in the practical world sort of just don't get. That things cannot be perfect. I've had young students come up to me that believe everything on activist websites and say to me, well, can't you make slaughterhouses perfect? No, nothing in the practical world is perfect, but we can get it up to a very, very high level. Percentage of animals you use electric prod on. You want to get a really excellent score? It's 5%. Well, we do allow up to 25%, and the reason for that is Holstein steers. Holstein dairy cows, they got one gear. Slow crawl. Percentage of vocalizer allowed 3, and falling down, 1%. Now the thing is, falling down could be caused by a slippery floor, that'd be a facility problem, or it could be caused by you roughed the cattle up. It could also be caused by something wrong with the cattle. And you gotta bring an animal into that plant that you can handle, not something that's half dead. And boy, I can tell you, beef's doing a much better job than dairy is on the condition of the cull animals. Dairy industry is really bad on this. There's 3 times more skinny animals coming into the plants from dairies than there is from beef. And that's data from 2 years ago. That's recent data. That's somewhere the dairy industry needs to get it through their head that they raise beef. And unfortunately, all that awful stuff out there at Central Valley and awful videos at Westland Hallmark, which was all dairy cows, in the eyes of the public, beef took the rap for it. I had countless people come up to me and say, oh, I'm never going to buy hamburger ever again. I'm never going to buy beef ever again. It never went through their minds that those were dairy cows. Okay, the advantage of using an objective scoring system is I audited a plant, you audited a plant, we're getting the same scores. It's simple. It's like traffic laws. They're simple. Speeding, you know what that means. Stop signs do mean stop. Red lights mean stop. And erratic driving, they deal with that real harshly. And those are the 3 basic things that you need to enforce for traffic. Okay, in 1996, when I collected baseline data, only 30% of the plants passed the audit. Now, today, it's close, on the stunning, it's close to 100%. Most of the plants now run right around 97, 98% first shot score. They're not going to get any better than that. And you know, the problem is we get young people today in the cities that they don't do practical things in school anymore. They've taken out the cooking classes, they've taken out the sewing classes, they've taken out welding shop and wood shop and auto mechanic shop, and they're totally away from the world of practical things. And I think it's great that your beef council, you know, is doing these tours, you know, and got the blogger lady out there on those tours. That's doing the right stuff. The principle is you measure a small number of critical control points that find lots of problems. Let's look at vocalization. It can be caused by a sharp edge on the restrainer. It can be caused by, okay, the stunner failed to work. It can be caused by electric prods. It can be caused by slamming a door on them. See, there's lots of different bad things that make them vocalize in the stunning area. That's why it's a good outcome measure, because it measures a multitude of sins. A good critical control point measures lots of problems. Because the thing is, I can't measure everything. Obviously, for your performance, feed conversion and weight gain are those are two outcome measures. Now this is using things I can directly observe. One of the things that's driving me crazy, and I'm on a lot of welfare committees for a lot of the big retailers, is people want to make reams of paperwork audits. Oh, I worked 20 years in construction. I saw more faked up truckers' log books and more fake cost estimates and everything else than you can shake a stick at. I want to look at stuff I can directly observe. I don't, records are important, but the directly observable is more important. You don't want to get a perfect audit on your paperwork and then you got a bunch of half-dead sick cattle out in your feed yard or rolling over from heat stress or some other, bad problem. The other thing I found, being on these committees, I hate to say it, I've seen this in dairy, I've seen it in chicken, and I've seen it in pork. The worst producers get on the boards to water down the standards. Hate to say it. I was on a pork thing, this was probably 6 years ago or so, and they wanted to make it that you could have 10% of your sows be a body score 1. That's like bone rack sows. Nobody has a farm that terrible. That's not an audit, that's a joke. You've got to make it strict enough. Now, fortunately, my standards made for AMI were strict enough to really work. Because we've got to get rid of some of the really, bad stuff. There's so much good stuff going on, but the activist groups go in there and they find the bad stuff and put it up. We got to be putting up more and more videos. Also, they know how to social network. And another problem we got here is this bad internet access. And I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal on McDonald's Wi-Fi hotspots. All the kids are using McDonald's to do their homework in because they can get decent internet access. One of the problems you have is you can't watch the videos. At Kearney, at the Hampton Inn at Kearney, its internet connection was a joke there. And this makes it hard to do some of the social networking. You can do email, but you gotta work on getting stuff out there. You may have to, put it on a CD and send it to someone in a city to upload it. But you need to be doing it. I've worked all my life, and it just makes me sick when I saw abusive stuff going on with cattle in a brand new plant. And they got like 2 million views on that. And there's all kinds of other plants doing all kinds of good stuff and nobody knows about it. And the one thing that's bad is what's plastered all over the internet. Okay, you can also use scoring to show how something has improved. Okay, you had air blowing in the face and you had to prod, and I had a lot of cattle vocalizing and I dropped it from 4.5% down to 0. Or the entrance is too dark, so I light up the entrance. It's amazing what I could do with a portable light, duct tape, pieces of cardboard. Oh, it's amazing how many packing plants I could make work with cardboard and lights and duct tape. Now the problem is the portable light doesn't work very well lighting up the dark whole thing from the outside. But when you get them indoors where their eyes adjust, then you can do a lot of things with lights. So it went from 38% getting poked with the prodder down to 4% because now the animals would move. Now this is my center track restrainer system. And I love the fact that in the title slide of the movie, the actual construction drawings for the restrainer were animated. All the drawings that were shown in the movie were my real drawings. That really turned me on. And I know there's been problems with getting the movie out here because you can't stream it. And we're having trouble ordering DVDs. The people in the big cities forget that the people in the rural areas need DVDs for things. Boy, if there's something that you guys need to do, you need to do something about internet access. I'll get off that subject. Well, half the cattle in North America, when they go to a meatpacking plant, are handled in the system. Now, there's some things in this from a behavior standpoint that are really important. And what frustrates me, but I guess it gives me job security, because I still have to teach people the same stuff 40 years later. This has now been out in the field now for 22 years. Well, this whole apparatus is 7 feet above the floor. So as the cattle come in, you've got to have a false floor so they don't see the visual cliff effect. Well, people take my false floor out because they don't want to clean it. Doesn't work. Also going into this, you've got a non-slip ramp. Remember in the movie, if you saw it, how they put the metal plate in there to make them slip? Well, this restrainer has the exact same ramp design that dip bed has. And in 2012, I had 2 plants mess up my ramp. I had to go back in and fix the ramp. They're making the same mistake that was made in that dip vat almost 35 years ago. Repeating the same mistake. People have a hard time getting their head around using behavior to control your animal rather than force. Also, the length of the little hold-down rack has to be long enough so their head doesn't pop out until they're all the way restrained. That's the difference between calm cattle and berserk cattle. Strictly behavioral. Just to show you that animals are afraid of the visual cliff, this is an old 1950s visual cliff experiment, and both the baby and the little goat are not going to walk over that plate of glass, where they are crawl out over the plate of glass so they can see the visual cliff effect. Fear of falling, primal fear. Also, by doing things like reducing pressure on the neck, on a head restraint, I reduced the vocalization from 23% down to 0%. On an indoor facility, where the cattle were inside, and I put a light on the entrance, I reduced the vocalization from 8% down to 0 because they weren't zapping them with a prod all the time. And there's a light that works great on an indoor facility, probably will not work on an outdoor facility because the sun is so bright. And here's some hard to drive pigs. We already talked about some of the problems of difficult to handle animals. We've gotten some of these plants now are so good, can't get the plant any better. But now I've got pigs, unfortunately, and people feed them too much ractopamine, can't walk off the truck and walk up to the stunner. And then they say to me, why don't you put conveyors in the floor? That's a pile of rubbish. I made that mistake back in the 80s. For baby bob calves, the little dairy calves, we put conveyors in the floor. It's like horrible, it's useless, it didn't work. You know, we got to solve problems where they start. And I got to have an animal that can walk. Other problems I've seen in the pigs is leg conformation. There's genetics problems with their legs. So you overload them on ractopamine and you have problems with their legs. Now I've got a pig that I can't handle it. And as you know, downer cows go in the garbage. And some of the plants now are tanking some of the downer pigs. See, there's 3 ways to do auditing. I can do the animal-based outcome measure. You notice when I'm talking about auditing, there's no equipment design stuff here. If you want to handle them in toilet paper facilities, that's fine if you can make that work. Don't think you're going to make that work, but I want certain outcomes. And animal-based outcome measures all around the world on doing guidelines for animal welfare. That's the trend, to make most things outcome-based rather than what's called resource-based, where I tell you exactly how to build something. And then you got to have some practices to just ban. Okay, we're not going to have every employee in the whole feed yard zapping everything with hot shots. You know, we're going to ban everybody carrying them around. Ban tail docking in dairy cows, things like that. Dragging non-ambulatory animals around. You don't do that. There's certain things you just don't do. And there are a few input-based variables you still need to use, like basic, minimum truck loading densities, some feed space, feed trough space requirements. Okay, now let's get out on the ranch or the feed yard and look at animal-based outcome measures. Okay, let's say for cows, body condition score. Now, hopefully you don't have too many skinny cows. Lameness. Lameness is a major outcome variable. And I have to say, I'm rather upset about the amount of lame feed yard cattle that we have now since the handling's got better. The problems we got now with lameness are not caused by handling, they're caused by other stuff. It's not okay. Dirty animals, like another welfare issue, is a whole mud issue. Injuries, cancerized, I think people are getting better on getting cancerized sent in before they get bad. But you organic people, you don't get off the hook. Because there's some organic people where bad has become normal and they think it's okay for cattle in the spring to have bald spots from lice. No, it's not okay. And one thing about having been in the industry for 40 years, I remember what cattle grubs are. You guys probably remember what cattle grubs are. Oh yes, I know how to take them out. You pop a Coke bottle over them and pop a little worm out. Really gross. Young people today, they don't know what that is. Boy, I hope we don't see those things come back. That's good riddance. But bald spots is not okay. If you're on any kind of indoor facility, ammonia levels, that would have to be an engineering measure. But we're getting people putting cattle in hoop barns. And one of the problems you have with something where you use bedding is people don't use enough bedding. And I've been in some of those where they've been a big muck hole, a great big mess of muck, cattle stomping around in muck. That's not okay. So you can measure them for dirtiness, ammonia levels, and then abnormal behaviors. Usually that's not issue of beef. Okay, lameness is a really good example of a good outcome measure. Because so many different things can make them lame. Yes, and I have a couple of other things I probably need to add to this list that's not on there. And you might wonder, well, how could beta agonists make them lame? Well, it's a vasoconstrictor, so it messes up the coronary vein, right, where the hoof joins the furry part of the leg. But lots of different things cause lameness. Lameness is chronic pain. Dairy cows have terrible problems with lameness. And you know, when you look at the public, the thing the public get the most concerned about are cutting bits and pieces off without anesthetic. Like Gail Golab, the American Veterinary Medical Association, she summarizes it very nicely. Gail's really cute when she goes, they don't like them in tiny little boxes. That's going to be sow stalls and veal stalls. They don't like it when you cut bits and pieces off without pain relief. And they're very, very concerned about how we kill them. But the lameness thing, I mean, I'm like I tell you, getting older, it's not fun. Joints start hurting. It's just, oh man. I was at a truck loading dock the other day, and I used to be able to get on the end of a truck loading dock and just jump up on it. Not anymore. And when it comes to these cattle handling accidents, they can happen when they go on down the supply chain. It's the people my age that are getting hurt. It's the people 50 and up that get run over by these cattle. Okay, then you have some practices, sow gestation stalls. You're not going to sell that one to the public. Docking dairy cow tails, you know, beating animals up. Now, there's been situations in the meatpacking plants where when does tapping an animal with a paddle become beating an animal? Well, I'm actually working with Janet Riley and AMI now, and we're making a video on this, and we're showing tapping with a paddle, good handling, and then I got some cardboard boxes, the U-Haul book boxes. We put 2 reams of paper in the bottom of the box to weight it down, and I took a paddle and I did what the USDA would call egregious animal abuse, but I did it to a box, and I smushed in the box, and I kicked a hole in the side of it to demonstrate things that I think most people would consider beating and, you know, egregious animal abuse. See, the problem we got right now with USDA regulations on humane slaughter is vague wording. They say things like agitation and excitement, excessive electric pride use, egregious animal abuse, whatever that is. Well, I demonstrated some egregious abuse of a box. And then there's a few input measures you're going to need, space requirements, you know, especially on, not so much for feed yards, but for, you know, indoor animals, space on a truck, some stunning equipment specifications. And that's my website. Let's make sure I've gone over all my notes. I am going to have some few books out there for sale. And if you're really interested in all this scoring stuff, you can order online a book I have, a textbook, Improving Animal Welfare, a Practical Approach. And it's a scientific book. It's not a popular book. And I go through a lot of different research on some of the animal welfare research. And what I'm trying to do is bridge the gap between ag and the public. And, you know, you're doing a lot of stuff right. You got to get communicating with the public. You know, you better start making these CDs and mailing them to your friends in Chicago so they can upload them onto the internet. Because, you know, some of the pictures the activists paint is not pretty. They'll go on a pig farm or dairy. Oh, and dairies had the 2 worst videos, absolutely worst videos. Beating up dairy cows, pitchfork in the side of a dairy cow, and then they imply that all dairies do that, which is simply not true. Okay, want to open it up for some good discussion. I think we've got plenty of time. Always like to do some good discussion. And I'm going to pick somebody if nobody has any questions. Okay, right there.
Dr. Grandin, a question or comment. I would agree with you that animal handling welfare within the beef community, feed yard tranches has gone a long way.
That's gone a whole lot better.
What has been done within the transportation industry in to me, that's the biggest frustration I have at our facility.
As you come in and there's bad stuff with truckers coming onto your ranch.
Trying to get our point across and our handling techniques across to them.
What I think you need to do with the truckers coming, if it's a ranch, you load them, you tell the driver to sit in this truck or to go sit in your house or something. We'll load the cattle for you. In fact, that's what the pig companies are doing now. The integrated pig companies don't even let the drivers touch the pigs. The loading crews load them, and at the plant, they unload them. And the best way is just don't let the truck drivers do it. And you just ask the driver how many he wants in each compartment, you'll do it. And he can be there to check the gates if he wants, just don't let him do the handling. But then we got to look at driving, because if they're out there stomping on the brakes, stomping on the gas, they're going to be throwing the cattle around.
And I can't disagree with that. To me, that's a band-aid to the problem. They need as much training or more than we have.
I would agree. Well, you see, what's happening? Let me kind of tell you what's happening. The retailers are closest to the plants. So back in 1999, when the whole thing started, I was hired by McDonald's and Wendy's to train their food safety auditors on doing the plant audit. And boy, let me tell you, in 6 months I saw a lot of change. First of all, broken equipment got fixed. All the slippery floors got fixed. You know, they really cleaned up a lot of stuff right away. Then, on the trucks coming into the plants, the USDA used to say that wasn't in the jurisdiction. Now, if they're on the plant property, they're now within the USDA jurisdiction. So that's helped a lot with the fat cattle handling, because the plants are getting really strict on things like broken doors, broken trailers, absolutely filthy trailers. The plants are starting to police that. But unfortunately, you know, I think the next step, you know, large feed yards, they might start inspecting some large feed yards, but there's no way McDonald's or any other retailer is going to go to every single ranch. And I agree, they do need the training. On the packing plant side, they're requiring the truckers to do in pork, to do the pork quality assurance. You know, they're starting to require doing the beef quality assurance. The other thing, I hate to say it, that we have learned with video auditing, Cargill and JBS have got video cameras monitored by third-party auditing companies, you know, in their plants. And you know what we've found in the 12 years now I've been working on this stuff, is that 10% of the employees they had to get rid of them. There were 10% of the people there that when their back was turned, they were out there abusing livestock. And there's been truck drivers they've had banned, and it's right around 10%. And even back in the 70s, the worst stuff is done by that bottom 10%. And I think it has to get down to where there's certain drivers that are really abusing cattle, and then you have to try to hire somebody else. You know, the word gets around that this guy, Jim, is a really bad driver. It's, you know, as each rancher just says, no, we're just not going to have this. But one of the things you can do on your own ranch is load your own cattle. He can tell you how many to put in each compartment because it's his truck, but as long as it's not too many. And how he wants it loaded, but you put them in. Just take over. And just, you'll put them in, you put all the hot shots away, and unloading trucks, you can totally ban hot shots. And if you have a halfway decent facility, you can usually load them with no hot shots. Okay?
Well, where do you think we're at, and where do you think we should be or will be with castration and dehorning of cattle?
Well, that's a real problem area. There's a lot of research going on right now with castrating and dehorning. Kansas State's doing research, CSU's starting to do some research. If you want to look at where the research is, you can go on the PubMed database. PUBMED stands for Public Medicine. Just type that into Google, PubMed database, or you can go on Google Scholar, type in Scholar, and then you can search scientific articles or Science Direct. Those are your three databases, and those will work on your bad internet connections because it's just text. And type in calf castration, calves castration, you've got to use all your different words, or calf dehorning, calves dehorning. The research is very clear, especially on dehorning. They need to be getting painkillers and pain relief. Now, the problem we've got in beef is you don't want to handle them twice. See, in dairy animals, they've got them in little pens, and you can go down there, shoot them with some lidocaine, come back 15 minutes later, and do the horn blends. But beef, you wouldn't want to handle twice. So they're trying to work on some methods where you do something right at the time that helps reduce the pain. There's been research with meloxicam, but these things do hurt. There's also been research with banding those bigger animals with those big rubber banders. 3 weeks later, when the necrotic testicles fall off, there's pain. That's not a pain-free process. Another thing you've got to remember about cattle is that they hide their pain. People go, oh, that can't be hurting. He's drinking out of the water trough and he's eating grass. Well, I did a little study. We did a little study one time with a bander thing, informal thing. I went over to a feed yard and they were banding some cattle. And half the cattle got the band and the other half, they put them in a squeeze chute and did what's called a sham procedure. Pretended to put it on, but actually didn't. And I'm sitting in the scale house where the cattle come out into this holding pen, but they cannot see me. And some of the cattle had the bands, did some stomping. Some of them I couldn't tell, but I had one animal out of about 30 that laid on the ground and moaned, rolled around and moaned. Yeah, and I come out of that scale house, he sees me, boom, he was up and acting like it was okay. You see, the reason why cattle do that is they are a prey species. You know, people will say about sheep, oh, sheep, find one day, dead the next. But since they're an ultimate prey species animal, they really hide it. But cattle tend to hide the fact that they hurt, especially when they know you're around and they see you around. He didn't hide it because he didn't know I was in the scale house. I was spying on him. And these things do hurt. And the animal activist groups call them the mutilations. Now, what are some of the things we could do? We could get polled cattle. We got to be careful about restricting the gene pool, but I think they can work around that problem. Castration, we could feed bulls. I was over in England, they feed bulls. You know, you give them too many beta agonists, they look like a bull again. And you get the meat quality problems to go along with it. Why don't we just keep the testicles on? They're free. Why do we take them off? Maybe we don't need to take them off. There's a technology that nature gave us that we're cutting off. Now, of course, that won't do anything for your heifers, and that's 40% of the cattle in the feed yards. Maybe it needs to be less so we can get more cows and not have beef go the way of lamb. I certainly wouldn't want to see that happen. But in Europe, you go to Europe, they don't have steers in Europe. Everything's bulls. I went down to New Zealand, they had Holstein bulls, pasture reared, going in the plant, and they were not attacking people because they were just all reared in a group together. England, what they do there, they got lots of grass, and so they have these monster cows, which will not work here because you don't have enough feed to feed monster cows. So maybe you're still going to have to use the beta agonists on the heifers, but maybe we need to leave them intact. I know that's not what people want to hear, but I think it was kind of strange when I went to the packing plant. They thought they looked weird because they didn't know what yearling bulls actually looked like. It was putting the male character onto them. And young bulls have a meat quality decrement. But when you give them too many beta agonists, you have a meat quality problem. You know, I went through the Chianina fads in the 70s. You know, in the 70s, we were going to solve all the problems in the beef industry with gigantic cattle. Second article I ever did with the Farm and Rancher magazine was on monstrous Charolais bulls that were imported in here. Well, you can't support those in the desert. And you know what? The meat quality was terrible. There's a basic problem. Quality and quantity, two opposing goals. I don't care if you make them big with genetics or you make them big with beta agonists or hormones, you're going to end up with crappy meat. Doesn't matter what method you use.
How much anxiety do you have with castrating soon after birth or at 6 weeks?
Oh, basically what the research is showing is at young age, you do these things at a young age, it's less stressful. And when you look at the things that hurt, we're going to rank them. Dehorning's the worst. Then castration, then branding looks really bad. Yes, it hurts, but it's probably the least bad of the three things that we do. And I don't know, and when people ask me about branding, I just answer this way. Okay, the West is a big place. And if I put my cattle out on summer pasture, I'd like to have them. You know, when I go back to round them up, not have them all stolen. And then I talk about all the various ways that people steal cattle. like having semis that they slaughter them in going down the highway and all kinds of other stuff. You know, and until they can get really cheap, quick DNA testing, I think in the very, very extensive country, we're going to have to do branding. Now, when I first started, people were branding pen numbers all down the sides of cattle. That was horrible. Feedlot branding, yeah, if they're going to come in and say feedlot, there shouldn't be any feed yard branding. That's pretty well gone. That's indefensible. But a really tough country ranch, as of right now, I defend branding. And I said, if I had cattle, I'd do it on my own cattle because I don't want to steal them. People can cut the ear tags off. They can, there's retina scanning you can do. As those technologies get better, we still got people doing dumb stuff like waddling, where you cut a piece of flap of skin here and it hangs down, or an ear, chopping ears all up, not just notching them, really hacking them up. There's a bunch of people up in the Pacific Northwest that really like to hack things up. You know, there's some stuff like that we just, shouldn't be doing. I think we have to look at everything we do and go, you got a wedding, and you're going to invite your wedding guests out from New York and Chicago. Are you going to be proud to show them stuff, or are you going to be squirming around? And a well-run slaughterhouse passes the test. I've taken lots of people through Greeley and Fort Morgan. And when I take them in there, I have them go out and watch the trucks unload, and they're amazed at how quiet they come off. I have them watch them going up the chute for about 20 minutes, and then we look at stunning. I always do a big, long part of the tour of just watching cattle go into the plant. Because people think they know they're going to get slaughtered, and I want to show that they don't know they're going to get slaughtered. And that makes a lot of people feel a whole lot better. Now, when it comes to welfare issues in livestock, beef actually has the fewest problems. Chicken, egg-layer chicken, and pigs have the most contentious issues because of the housing issues. You don't have the housing issues, like sow gestation stalls and little tiny chicken cages. Oh, when I did my first egg-layer operation for some of the restaurant chains, they had these hens jammed in so tight that they couldn't eat all at the same time. And they couldn't lay down at night without being on top of each other. And they didn't want to show me the old biddies, the 2-year-olds at the end of the lay. I made them show them to me, and they were all half naked. And a lot of that problem's genetic. She's putting so much into her eggs, there's nothing left for the hen. Because you can take that same breed of chicken, they're hybrid, and you put them in the alternative systems, the feathers all fall out too. It's genetic. That's what I call biological system overload. And in the future, that's going to be some of the worst problems. And it's going to be worse in the really intensively housed animals. But some of the stuff going on with beta agonist is biological overload. I'm getting concerned that genetically with the dairy cow, pushing the metabolism to the point where the dairy cow doesn't breed. Nature has a system that when they get too thin, breeding's shut off. Maybe that's getting turned on. Beef, you've got most of the things in beef are much easier to fix. But the thing that's bad is that 75% of consumers associate beef with factory farming, more so than dairy or even pigs. 75% associate beef with factory farming, and they associate beef with wrecking the land, and that all the cattle ought to be just booted off all the public lands. Ranchers need to get out and show what they're doing as good environmental stewards for the land. And that that you can improve livestock if you do it right. Also, another thing that's shown up in every single survey ever done is biggest bad. Every consumer survey done has shown that. The other thing that most consumers want, especially younger consumers, local, they're really into the organic stuff. Local, though, is the big thing. People are really getting interested in that. Any other questions?
Any other questions for our speaker?
Okay,
I don't have a question. Could I just make a brief comment, Matt? I just think it's just so, and I may not have many more opportunities to do this, but to thank Temple for all that you've done for the industry. You've been a friend of the industry while you bridged the gap between a lot of consumer groups and a lot of the higher on the packing plants and the retailers, and you've constantly been there as a knowledgeable and a friend of us, and spoke up for us. And plus, you've been at the feedlots and done so much to change the way cattle are handled. I just think we owe, as an industry, you a tremendous amount of appreciation for
Well,
that.
thank you very much. And the other thing I want to say is, well, I've said some things that might have been kind of harsh, but you know, friends tell friends, you know, that when they need to change things. There's so much good things being done in beef, but I got to say I was a bit frustrated that just got the packing plants, the slaughter plants are working just beautiful. Then I start seeing problems. I'm going, wait a minute, we've got tiger stripes here that are down. What's going on here? I've got cattle that are stiff. What's going on here? Don't give me these kind of problems. Or cattle, the super wild thing didn't show up before because handling's so bad. That's an easy one to fix. That is a handling thing. But you know, we've just got to we got to communicate with consumers, and we need to look at everything we do and say, you're going to show that to your wedding guests from New York. And the well-run slaughter plant and a well-run feed yard and ranch will pass that test. Thank you all for coming.